Sometimes simple concepts are scary as hell. That is a trait common with earlier retro titles. Games from the early days of the industry that used the more crude graphics of the time have the uncanny ability to scare the crap out of gamers these days. Part mastery of tone, part imagination fodder, these retro titles have managed to succeed in places that some games these days still can't accomplish. So today we are counting down the top 10 scary retro video games you need to play. Some of these might be familiar, some of them might be totally obscure and brand new to you, but regardless, you're gonna love them all. So let's jump in. Starting us off in at number 10, Castlevania 2 Simon's Quest. Let's begin with the classic, Castlevania 2 Simon's Quest, released for the NES in 1988. While the first Castlevania is arguably full of scares itself, Simon's Quest really elevated the formula of its predecessor by integrating more RPG elements, a day and night cycle with grim implications, conversations with NPCs, an inventory, etc. So many of the elements that we associate with the more modern games in the franchise. Dark, gritty, eerie, and filled with horrors, it is an iconic retro title that any horror aficionado needs to play. Really, the whole beginning of the franchise you should probably check out because it's iconic and it's just so cool. Moving on to number 9, Alone in the Dark. A PC game released in 1992, Alone in the Dark was the beginning of a survival horror series that has lasted the test of time, with the latest release dropping in 2015. But we are here to talk about that first title. Largely inspired by H.P. Lovecraft's work along with the influences of Voodoo, H.R. Geiger, and the Wild Wild West, it was one of the first 2 games to use polygonal characters versus pre-rendered backgrounds. Considered the first ever 3D survival horror game, Alone in the Dark places you inside of a haunted mansion with the simple goal of just surviving. There's no one to rescue, no ulterior motive, no side quests. You just need to get out alive, all while solving puzzles to do so. Up next, number 8, Go to Hell. Go to Hell came out in 1985, and it is weird as hell. Or, yeah. That's strange. Go to Hell came out in 1985 and it is weird AF. You find yourself in the depths of hell in search of 7 crosses while you traverse a series of hellish horrors. At its heart, it is a maze game, but filled with some really scary imagery. There's screaming skulls, dead bodies galore, straight up explicit torture, all of which dance the line of legit scary yet quite comical, if you have a dark sense of humor, I guess. Some critics have even likened it to a predecessor of Hotline Miami in terms of colors and aesthetic. So hey, if that floats your boat, maybe it's worth checking out. In at number 7, Night Stalker. From 1982, next up we have Night Stalker. Night Stalker, also known as Dark Cavern on the Atari 2600, might be nowhere near impressive as far as graphics are concerned, by today's standards that is. But back in the day, it was up to par with the likes of Pac-Man and Berserk. Placed in a creepy haunted cavern, because of course it's haunted, this shoot 'em up is filled with a whole lot of violence and a whole lot of 8-bit terror. In addition to that, each gun you acquire only has 6 shots, and if you run out, you need to make your moves wisely until you can find another, adding some serious edge to this old school classic. In at number 6, Escape from Monster Manor. From 1993, this retro first-person shooter is one that may be hard to come by, thanks to it being created for the 3DO interactive multiplayer system. You traverse through a maze, collect keys to open doors, collect pieces of a talisman, and of course, kill horrific-looking monsters. The latter bit is what puts this game on our list, clearly. Despite the time, the monsters, creatures, and entities you encounter are still quite scary even to this day. I mean, yes, it's a little aged, but still pretty darn scary. And at number 5, Alien. This 1984 tie-in game managed to accomplish something that many early movie tie-in video games failed to do: be good. Despite being released a handful of years after Ridley Scott's Alien hit cinemas, this 8-bit game still does its namesake justice, and is genuinely scary. For the PC, the game takes a different approach than you'd think. It is a strategy title where you have 2 options: lure the xenomorphs to Nostromo's airlock, or escape the ship with Jones the Cat in tow, because how dare you even think about leaving Jones the Cat? While the graphics might be lacking to some, it's the slow burn tension that makes this title a scary game worth your while, especially if you're willing to put in the work for its long-haul playstyle. In at 4, Necromancer. Another title from 1982, Necromancer is as scary as its title implies. Initially created for the Atari 800, Necromancer has been described by critics as an 8-bit fever dream. Compared to other titles on this list, each level lacks consistency in terms of narrative and playstyle. One level has the player as a dark wizard planting trees and beating up the goblins who try to destroy them. Another level puts you in the shoes of one of those trees, now sentient, needing to avoid trippy hands that reach down and try to grab you. The game's premise is that you are trying to grow grow trees to defeat the evil necromancer Tetragon, whose evil minions are trying to take over a graveyard. There's a lot going on. But for the time, it's got some really impressive graphics and sound design work that makes it definitely worth your while. Moving on to number 3, something a little different, Wolfman. Upon first glance, Wolfman, a text adventure game from 1988, might not appear scary at all, or interesting, but take the time to actually partake in this text adventure and you will not regret it. You play as Wolfman, a character who must learn to control their primal urges and prompts the player's imagination to go wild. The game begins with your character waking up in torn clothes, covered in blood, and an angry mob of townspeople having crowded around the mangled corpse of a woman. Yikes, right? This is a prime example of how simplicity can be scary as hell. It's like reading a terrifying interactive novel. And it will leave chills down your spine. Moving on to number 2, Splatterhouse. Splatterhouse is a long-running horror video game series that began as an arcade game, and over time expanded onto console and mobile. The original Splatterhouse, which was released in 1990, had a release on the TurboGrafx 16, which occurred in the days of NES's height of popularity. The game was praised by some because of how much it leaned into gratuitous violence, which is something you would never get on an NES, or at least at that time. It's a beat 'em up largely influenced by slasher films and H.P. Lovecraft, with many considering it to be an homage to the more violent parts of American horror cinema. You play as Rick, a Jason Voorhees lookalike who is trapped inside of a haunted mansion, searching for his girlfriend, all while slaughtering terrifying monsters with an assortment of weapons like a machete and a shotgun. And finally, in at number 1, Sweet Home. Sweet Home may have a pleasant sounding title, but it is anything but. From 1989, this Japanese game is often seen as the spiritual predecessor to the Resident Evil franchise. A top-down RPG survival horror, Sweet Home is actually a film adaptation video game. The story of both the game and the movie follows a team of 5 filmmakers exploring an old mansion in search of valuable frescoes. Frescoes being the large mural-esque paintings the likes of Michelangelo's The Creation of Adam. Now, the building is on the brink of falling apart too, which adds another element to the gameplay. The game does not rely on jump scares, but rather builds tension as you progress and uses claustrophobic atmospheres to further increase the player's discomfort during certain sections. It's also credited as being one of the first titles in the survival horror genre to use mechanics the likes of limited weapons and items, and, scariest of all, the mechanic of permadeath. If one of the characters dies during the game, they are gone for good for the rest of the story. Alright, there we have it, friends. What other retro games scare the crap out of you? Give us a shout in those comments below and let us know. If you dug this video, you guys know what to do. Hit that like button, subscribe to Top 10 Gaming if you haven't already, and be sure to check out one of the other videos that are floating around somewhere on this screen in a playlist. It's worth your while, like a lot of these games on this list were. I said that a lot this video, didn't I? Anywho, thank you for watching, friends. I will catch you all in the next one.